I'm Eric Barden.
I'm Amy Barden.
Welcome to another episode of Bombardin Podcast, where we discuss issues from different perspectives. We're just not always going to give you like your algorithm. We're not going to give you what you've always heard and what you want to hear. Sometimes you're going to hear stuff you don't like, and we think that's good.
So our guest today is Eci Ameh. I think when I reached out to her, the text said, "Hey, you want to come argue with my husband for an hour?" And I mean, legitimately,
Nice.
I'll have to ask her, but I think, and she was like, absolutely, I do.
Absolutely, I do.
Eci is one of the best leaders I know in the space of police accountability, police reform, consent decrees.
Well, we'll see
So
about that.
I don't really plan to talk today.
We'll see about
I'm going to
that.
get a
Yeah.
snack.
Yeah.
And let you two go after it. She's a wonderful person, really dynamic thinker, and I think you're going to like her in spite of yourself.
In spite of myself. Yeah. Well, I obviously have some strong feelings after 38 years in law enforcement about police accountability, police oversight. I think the intent is good. I think sometimes operationally it's can be problematic. And so I don't have any idea what her perspectives are. And I look forward to a lively, mutually respectful discussion and debate.
All right, let's go.
Let's do it. Welcome, Eci. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. I should have asked you where to look during this thing.
Well, you look at us.
You
look
smile at me,
whatever.
glare at him.
Yeah. We're just going to
Yeah.
have a conversation.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. You don't have to do like The Office and look at the camera. Although that could be fun,
All right. So first things first, tell us what's your current role? What are you doing?
I'm the executive director of the Seattle Community Police Commission. So it's an independent city department. Independent meaning we don't report to the mayor's office. We don't report to the city council. That's important because we're part of the police accountability system in Seattle, and we're the part that uplifts community voices in the conversation. So what opinions I advance as part of CPC is not what Eci thinks. It's what community members think, and particularly communities that are most impacted by policing. And sometimes that's adverse to the mayor, adverse to the city council. So that's the reason for the independence of the department.
So I've heard people ask the question, is the CPC meant to be like the public affairs arm of policing? I think sometimes there's that idea that you're supposed to be helping the brand. Can you clarify?
Yeah, we are so not here to help the brand. It's really the opposite. So what I like to say is we are not here to build trust for Seattle Police Department. We are here to show Seattle Police Department what they need to do to build trust. So our job is to basically engage with community members, understand their experiences, understand what they need to see from SPD in order to have trust. We don't benefit, CPC does not benefit from people being afraid to call the police when they need help. You know? We don't want Black and brown people to not want to call the cops when they need help. We don't want trans people to not want to call the cops when they need help. So we're not anti-police. We're pro-police accountability. We want those folks to have a police department that they can trust, that they can call on when they need them. And we believe that it is our role to make sure that that voice gets heard in the upper echelons of SPD so that the changes that need to be made systemically can be made. It's hard for community members that are operating in survival mode to have a seat at the table. So sometimes they feel like at best they're yelling at a big concrete tower and not getting any of their voice heard.
And you provide that conduit then for their voices to be heard.
Yeah, we sit at the table.
Yeah.
We sit at the table with SPD. We will give them a phone call. I'll call SPD leadership and say, hey, this is something I heard from communities. Can you help look into this? So we use our access within government to sit at the table on behalf of the community.
So before I ask you like 100 questions about this job, I realized when you were coming over, I do not know your background. I think that you're a law school person. I think you have a legal background, but I actually don't know where you're from or how you got into the space.
So let me go back to the way back. So back in the beginning.
I want to know about
beginning of time.
From the Wayback Machine.
So my family's from Nigeria.
Oh, no kidding.
So my family's from Nigeria. My parents came to the U.S., specifically Seattle, as international students to the UW.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
That's
so
cool.
my dad came first, and he got a couple engineering degrees. He has an aeronautical and industrial engineering degree from UW. So,
Underachiever.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
know,
sad
right?
story.
Yeah.
Well, imagine from like a little village in Nigeria, like
Wow.
our tribe is one of the smaller ones. In
Is that
Nigeria,
right?
there's 250 tribes.
Okay.
And most of the folks that are Nigerian that people know are either from the Igbo tribe, the Hausa tribe, or the Yoruba tribe. Those are the biggest tribes. They actually have like roles in government. They're that big.
Okay.
But our tribe is very small. It's Idoma tribe, and we're from the South Coast,
Okay.
a place called Benue State. So my dad heard about UW because of their engineering program from all the way in Nigeria.
Really?
So he applied
Wow.
and he came up here and he drove a taxi from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and then he would go to classes all day and save up money, send it back home and bring us up. And then my mom came and she, with the rest of us. And we...
So he then brought the family.
He brought the family.
Established himself.
Yeah,
and,
my sister wasn't born yet, but, me and my brother. And my mom studied business administration at UW.
Wow.
And
I feel like I would like your mom.
I think you would.
Yeah.
She works for King County, actually.
does she?
Yeah,
Okay.
she's in
Our
environmental
next guest?
resources.
Oh,
so-
that's awesome.
Yeah,
No kidding.
yeah. So-
What's interesting is my mom, my grandparents were Lebanese.
Oh, yeah?
And my grandfather came over from Lebanon, established a business in the U.S., sent money back,
Yeah.
and after a few years was able to bring the family over. And then my mom was the product of the reconciliation when my grandmother came to the U.S., my mom was born. So
Wow.
interesting.
That's
like
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, but then it feels like you can't fail. Like you have to hit a certain standard. because you,
like a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
I mean, immigrants are working really, really hard.
Yeah.
So that's
and
good.
still are. Just a much different environment these days than there were then.
So did you immigrate when you were a kid then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was 7.5.
Okay.
It's the half is
It's the
very
half.
important. You know,
Yeah.
I was
kind
not
of at
7,
that
I was
age.
8. Yeah.
There's a big difference
I don't
between
talk
7
about
and 8.
it all the time. And I remember my 8th birthday.
Yeah.
So that, in the U.S., and that was a big deal. I got rollerblades.
Oh, well,
So
solid.
It's
Solid.
not a
That's a good
bad.
gift.
It's not a bad
Yeah.
gift.
So tell me, just again, I'm going to derail this whole conversation, but tell me your first impressions and experiences, being dropped into, I assume, public school in Seattle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, most of my schooling was here. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I describe myself as bicultural, like a couple languages spoken in the home. We were eating fufu and egusi soup and watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So, there's like both things are happening at the same time. And that was true for like a lot of my friends and things like that in school. I think that for me, the immigrant experience, especially particularly coming over so young like I did, has been really interesting because having this understanding of how the world experiences things differently than we do here.
Yeah.
I feel like so often it's like, we think about the U.S. as like, this is the only context in which things happen. Like police community relations is the only context in which these things happen. And it's so much bigger and broader than that.
Yeah.
When my dad came to the States, he was like part of a host family program.
Okay.
It was big people that would host international students that would come over, almost like an exchange program, but not, you'd live with the family and they'd kind of help you adjust culturally. And so in that home, there were people from Japan, from Israel,
That's
from,
so cool.
Ethiopia. And so like I grew up with these folks being like my aunts and uncles. Like they all kept in touch even till now.
Yeah.
And so I grew up going to like bat mitzvahs,
Yeah.
and seders and all kinds of different cultural, we ate all types of different foods. We had latkes, we had Ethiopian food, injera, all these kinds of things. And so I feel like my experience was so much more enriched because of being an immigrant, but also understanding, the cultural differences here in the U.S. as well, kind of holding both at the same
So
time.
it sounds like, and this is always a very interesting topic to me because, it's like folks want to retain sort of connection to their culture. But then I think it's so important also to integrate into the new culture that you're moving into. But it sounds like your family sort of did the bonus plan where it was like a whole slew of different cultures in addition to your Nigerian culture and then the sort of whatever the American culture is. I mean, that's
Yeah.
looks like it worked out.
Yeah. Were you just was it like an extroverted kid and very comfortable with different ways of being and different ways of thinking? And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know. It's funny. I don't think of myself as an extrovert, but everyone else describes me as an extrovert. I think of myself as just somebody who just really wants to understand. I've always been really interested and curious about other people.
Yep.
So, I have no qualms about asking people about their experience, their background, and those types of things. And I think that understanding is what we all need.
Yeah.
We're all so different. And we're also so similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes people want to like skip over the different and just focus on the similar. Like, well, we got to focus on the common ground. And it's like, actually, the differences are pretty cool too.
Yeah, that's right.
If you spend a little time in that, that's actually pretty cool too. I don't have to believe the same thing as you faith-wise to be able to be like, well, that's pretty cool. Or maybe there's some elements of that I actually agree with and support, and even if I don't, it has nothing to do with me, right? Like, I mean, having that understanding of the complexity of like people are living their lives in different ways. They're like living and loving and faithing and dancing and eating in all kinds of different ways. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
And sometimes you love it and sometimes you don't, and sometimes you understand it and sometimes you don't. And none of that really matters. It's just
It's
understanding
okay.
the fact that it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay that there is a complexity
You
to
know,
life.
you missed the intro we did before you got here.
Yeah.
But, one of the things that we talk about on this podcast is providing different perspectives to issues and providing a format for people to have different perspectives and sort of discuss those perspectives, because I think so often in society now, you surround yourself with the people who agree with you. And so you only get the same feedback all the time. And you think then that any other perspective must be crazy. And I think culturally it's the same thing. If you isolate yourself and you only see one thing, you don't really understand.
Yeah.
And you don't have to like it, but we still to this day, have Lebanese food that for us is so fun because it's just, it's something that's more unique to us. And, Amy and I are married now, so she's a big participant.
To cook Lebanese food, which is,
Yeah.
I'm always like, isn't this Greek? And it really offends everyone. It's not.
There's a lot of similarity, though. But truthfully, there's a lot of similarity to Greek food. But, we have Lebanese Thanksgiving, which she thought there was a Lebanese Thanksgiving. It's like, no.
Yeah.
We just do that the day after
so
Thanksgiving. So she thought Lebanon had this. No, we made it up. But we make Lebanese food on the day after, and it's just fun for us, and some of the cultural things just to revisit that, even though I think we're fully integrated into American culture, but we still touch base with that. I think it's so important. And on this podcast, what we're trying to do is provide different perspectives, because not only do we surround ourselves with similar thinking people, but our social feeds and on all the algorithms just tell you what you want to hear anyway. And so I think those are obstacles to the things that you're talking about, which is to see things from other people's perspectives and to understand that not everybody sees everything the same because they have a different background and they have different cultural sort of expectations.
One of the challenges I had back a decade ago now, I was going to India routinely. So as part of a board that I was on was doing humanitarian work. I love world religion. I think the reason I gravitated toward you just are so genuinely curious and you love people. I think irrespective. And anytime I find one of those folks, I'm like that, there's a difference between like tolerance and just actually not being offended, just being curious. Anyhow, so I'm into my nonprofit career. I'm used to sort of theory of change and making the case for support. And, being, again, always the only sort of white Western gal in this space with, this is sort of the Dalit, like untouchable, like leprosy colonies and places like this that I didn't even know still existed. And I knew enough about Hinduism, I started to realize I've got to reframe the whole why, because I always talked about access and education so that you could transcend, right? So that you can transcend your circumstances and live a different kind of life. And that is totally antithetical to the belief, that my Indian friends had, which was that they were to endure well. And, so obviously we want to minimize suffering, but the belief was, reincarnation, right? That I will come back in a different station if. And I remember how challenging that was for me intellectually, because I did not want to promote my Western way of seeing it, right? And what I think it looks like to be empowered and what I think transcendence looks like. And then, again, to come back, I was living in the Midwest in those years in Seattle, and to feel like this is pretty darn discriminatory, actually.
Yeah.
We're saying if you're not the hyper intellectual, you're not using this type of language, even when we say like experiencing substance use disorder, right? I've had a lot of people say, Amy, just stop.
Yeah.
Or like Latinx. There's all these things that we come up with in university land. And so tell me your perspective on that, on, what does actual progress and tolerance look like as it relates to different identities and ways of being?
Yeah, it was so
Simple
interesting.
question, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was very, very complex. You went all the way to India and back with it. So
Tossing her a softball. Just tossing her a softball.
Let me get into the philosophy of it all. Well, you said something interesting when you talked about kind of the words that we use to kind of tackle some of these issues, and how sometimes we're talking above people's heads in a way, and it's so well-meaning, and it's also so not helpful at the same time.
Yeah.
Some of what we do in CPC, well, all of what we do in CPC is talk to communities about policing and public safety. But the way that we have to have the conversation, we have to be thoughtful. I can't go to a community member and say, well, so what do you think about the MOU between SPD and SPS on SROs at GHS, right? Like, I have to say, like, what do you think about cops in schools?
Yeah.
And then people are, well, I had an experience and it went this way or it went that way. But really being able to, we spend so much time in these institutions. We spend so much time in these policy discussions and getting into these really complex issues. And then we've got folks that are just like living in survival mode.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm trying to make sure that my lights stay on.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to make sure that I can take my kid to school without getting kidnapped and detained.
Yeah.
They're operating on that level, and that's exactly who we need to reach and exactly who we need to engage with. But a lot of times the way that we try to engage with them is it's so difficult that it can make it almost feel like irrelevant to them. Like, are you not getting that I'm in the middle of like living and surviving? Like, my reality is not, you coming here during your 9 to 5 and trying to have a conversation with me about some complex crowd management policy.
Yeah.
And so, that makes it challenging.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the work feels almost kind of reactive. Something has to go wrong for us to say, hey, now we've got this community member, they've got this experience, we want to lift them up, you know? And that feels unfortunate because what we're dealing with are systemic issues. We're not dealing with like that one officer in that one video that you have of this really violent arrest. We're dealing with the larger systemic issue. And so it's hard because you want to sit back and take this proactive, thoughtful approach. But then the issues feel so immediate and urgent. That there really isn't time to do it that
from
way.
the police department's perspective, the time to build trust isn't during the crisis, right? I mean, you certainly try to maintain trust and be worthy of trust during the crisis, but the time to build trust is when there's not a crisis. So you have to have those conversations. So I'm curious, and this is just sort of an interesting question from the law enforcement perspective, is you've learned a lot, I'm sure, about policies and procedures and how the police deal with different circumstances by virtue of this role. And your role is to provide a voice to those that perhaps don't have a voice. And then, as you had mentioned, utilize that opportunity to reach inside the police department and have those conversations to sort of advise the police, like, hey, here's what's going on out there. If you want to, have some impact, here's how you might address these issues. Is it also true that because you have insight, can you provide that insight to the community members that you're speaking to and give perspective that might nurture better understanding for the community about, well, this is kind of why they do that. We may not agree with this, but this is the thinking behind or the philosophy behind. Does that occur as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, we don't teach the community about why police do things the way that they do. It feels it feels like the wrong conversation to be having with community, you know? If you just got violently assaulted by a police officer, the last thing you want to hear is an explanation of why they do the things that they do. I think that there is a value to the perception of justness and fairness, as much as there is, you know, the procedures and the policies, right? The fact that people are experiencing to them just what feels objectively reasonable and fair. But let me give you an example, because I mean, I love what you said about trust built in crisis. I think there's been very few times that I have not seen a crisis going on when it comes to policing in Seattle. And so that downtime to be able to build trust, it almost feels like it doesn't even exist. But one thing I could call on crisis is SPD's relationship with the LGBTQ plus community right now and for quite some time. There's been so many examples reported to us by community members of things that have really eroded the trust of folks. I could bring up the May 24th protest at Cal Anderson, in which over 20 people were arrested, and several different uses of force reported, and there's a number of active investigations going on with OPA that I won't comment on, obviously, but those types of things, the lack of an LGBTQ liaison during this time and for quite some time after that with the police department, several other actions. Recently, I've been involved in some conversations with SPD leadership about what it looks like to be able to create a strategy to improve trust and to be able to take community-led recommendations about what trust building looks like, and build a plan to do that. There was an email shared with me about some plans and discussions that are going on right now about, well, what if we just teach members of the community about kind of like an SPD 101. We'll talk about what our arrest procedures and protocols look like. We'll talk about, how we train officers and the standards behind it and those types of things. And I feel like, as I saw that, I was like, okay, this is a really well-meaning effort, right? To try to bridge something that is a severed gap. And at the same time, how is that going to be received when you think about the climate and the relationship between those two parties? Is what folks from that community, do they feel that they need right now the most is an SPD 101, an opportunity to feel as if the deficit is their lack of understanding.
Yeah.
That's the reason that we're having these issues, is that you just don't get why we do the things that we do.
I've been in meetings like that, and it does not go well generally if it feels like, no, if you just only understood better. I mean, I think you want a balance. And what Eric's talking about, I translate all the time, because I have also had a line of sight into, especially during his era, his attempts at really significant reforms that would drive significant progress that got shut down. And so that would make me naturally defensive to go, yeah, no, he's actually trying to do the thing that the community also wants. Yes. And then you've got these other political currents and decision makers, sometimes, shall I say, thwarting progress? I don't know what to say about it, but I think that there needs to be better listening right now.
Yeah, I hear that, but I also think that it is, and I understand your position. You don't want to at all be perceived as representing the police department, because you want folks to feel, if folks feel disenfranchised by the police department, you want folks to be able to communicate with you, to be that conduit between them. And that's a hugely important role. I think it's also true. I think two things can be true at the same time. I think it's also true that if folks understood, like, context matters in all parts of life, no matter what issue we're talking about, context matters. So additional peripheral information about the context in which decisions occur. Now, you said that if somebody's been violently assaulted by the police, and you have to talk about the specifics of an incident to know about that. But there's so many other, situations. Why did the police respond with this many officers? Why did it take X amount of time to get to a call? It's not all, it's not all always some use of force issue. I'm sure that's very, very high on the list of issues, but it seems to me that, and perhaps you're not the conduit to provide the training or the insight into the police perspective or policies, but I think there's certainly a value in that. I mean, I remain convinced that thoughtful, intelligent people can sit down at a table and find common ground, even from wildly different perspectives. We do it all the time. We come at things from wildly different directions, and yet we often find a lot of you know what, that makes sense to me, and once in a while, even I make sense to her, and that's a golden
Rare.
that's a golden day
Yeah.
when that happens. Rare, but it happens. So. I just think it's so important to have representatives of the community also that have knowledge and insight and perspective to provide that back, not just say, "Oh, hey, police, people don't understand this, people don't understand that. You guys go fix it." I think that there's benefit to be made in information flowing both ways.
What I would say is, and I mean this industry at large, very rarely is an honest explanation given when something goes wrong. I mean, what I remember not understanding, again, it's sort of like mandatory minimum. Some of these, sometimes you have a policy on the books and that's what we need to be responding to, right? Or sometimes there's a philosophy. Okay, if we have at least 5 officers, we're less likely to. But rarely is that ever explained. I mean, I hear from the press often their frustration that they can't get a straight answer to a question. Why did it happen this way? And I think there are leaders in policing. There are several people around the country I really admire because they take the time to explain and to acknowledge sometimes, we should actually advance a change in this space.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I'm dwelling in this space all the time. My frustration is that I am more embedded in community, certainly, than in government, actually. And that community has been crying out for other responses to 911 calls,
Mm-hmm.
right? And ideally, we don't even want to invoke the 911 system.
Right.
People have been calling out for early intervention and real community-based supports. And I admire you holding the line on this issue. That I think what cops don't understand is that it's disproportionate power, right? If you're in a room with a bunch of sworn officers or chiefs and they say, well, what's your opinion? It just on its face, that's intimidating for most people, no matter how lovely. I mean, obviously, I married a guy that was in uniform, right? So no matter how lovely the person or how skilled the communicator, there's disproportionate power when you have folks in community and then folks in uniform, as far as that dialogue goes.
That's fair.
Do you know that?
I'm not sure that's at all inconsistent with what I just said, which was that we can have members of community who have knowledge about policies, procedures, context, and then provide that information to other community members. I don't think that at all represents.
But why wouldn't we flip that? Why wouldn't we want police officers to have knowledge of the communities?
Well, I just thought we just said that there's this power differential, and police officers talking to people, it doesn't work.
But we
now,
also said this
right
needs
there,
to come
right.
from a listening perspective.
Yeah.
Do you know why you and Amy can have different perspectives, but then you sometimes will agree with her and she will sometimes agree with you? Because you're in a high trust relationship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the situation with SPD in the community.
Right.
When you have a low trust relationship, you could read an entire encyclopedia. You could say the sky is blue and somebody's going to say it's purple.
Yeah.
When there's a low trust relationship,
100%.
Information transferred will not be received.
Right.
It will not be trusted.
Right.
When you have a high trust relationship, you can make a multi-million deal on a handshake on a golf course.
Yeah.
Right? But when you have a low trust relationship, If I pass you a contract, you're reading the fine print. You're going to pass it through 3-4 lawyers to make sure that I'm not trying to cheat you out of something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There is not an ability for there to be a transfer of information
Right.
in either direction
Right.
when there is a low trust relationship. And so that has to get fixed first. And I think that it needs to get fixed first by listening. I think the people that are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution.
Yeah.
They just often don't have access to voice that solution in places that it matters.
Yeah.
I think that SPD could benefit a lot by listening instead of assuming that it is us talking. It is us explaining more. It is us sharing more information. It is you learning more about how we work and what we do. That's going to fix the situation. What if you listen? What if there was an opportunity to go to community members and say, we don't know what it's going to take to earn your trust, but we want to hear what it's going to take. And we're going to listen to that, and we're going to listen to that in a good faith way. We're going to try to implement your solutions. That idea that was designed to go and teach LGBTQ plus people about how the cops work, there was not a single LGBTQ plus person in the room.
Yeah.
You have to question a solution that comes when the people that are most impacted are not in the room to discuss.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all.
You know,
I don't disagree with that at
Yeah.
all. But I also, I think it's very easy to say that the police, you know, they need to listen, but they need to inform. But look, I agree 100% that relationships are built on trust, right? And trust is built on integrity and honesty, and so that you do begin to believe. I mean, to your point about Amy and I disagreeing, but the reason that we have trust is because we understand more about how each of us think, and we understand how we look at things. And so we're able to say, okay, I understand what Amy's perspective is on this. And listening is certainly important. I don't dispute that at all. But the idea that the police should just sit and quietly listen and then incorporate whatever the community member's perspective is into how we do police work is not a reasonable way to establish trust. The reasonable thing to do is to have a back and forth and a discussion so that we can say, when you go out to the community members, something you just said a few minutes ago was that when you go out and you talk to folks in the street, you speak to them in the way that they communicate, right? And you
That's
listen.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's fantastic because contextually, that's where you're going to get the best feedback and the best information to move forward. And all I'm suggesting is that is also true from law enforcement's perspective. Law enforcement needs to go out and be able to listen and be able to talk to folks, and we do that. Law enforcement does that. We may not do it as much as we're not meeting the capacity for that. We have advisory councils, we have folks reaching out in a community policing way, but we did away with community policing officers because of we ran out of cops basically, and I would like us to figure out a way to where the police are also able to explain context. And I think given honest answers I was a pretty blunt interview in when I was, doing media stuff for the department, because I would just answer things honestly. And even though it was perhaps a little sharper edges than some of the more the smoother orators might provide.
Can't imagine that.
I know. It's hard to imagine.
There was this one clip that went viral in a press conference in policing, because Eric got a question, that he didn't like, and he goes, and then he answers the question. It's just like this little withering moment. And it was so funny.
Yeah, but I also think that's authentic. And I think it's authentic. And I think that I had a lot of positive feedback from folks in community because I was kind of a no BS guy and I kind of said it like it was. And then that's trust, right? Like he's not trying to shine me on. He's trying to tell me his perspective. And then that too breeds trust. So, I mean, it's not just listening. I just reject that. I reject you have to sit in a room and take an ass whooping. That's not, that is not.
I think that perception is exactly why they don't do it, right? Is that the idea that listening to communities is sitting in a room and taking an ass whooping.
I mean, remember
the
now.
wall can come down and it is completely possible to come in a
We
room
agree.
and listen to something you don't agree with. I've been doing it with you for the last however many months. So
stop.
It's totally possible to come and listen.
It's proven.
You know,
it can
and
happen.
it's proven. And you're hearing these wild things being said, and you know, it's you know, but there is
us being an example right here.
Look at that, you know, the different perspectives. I think that there's a way to come and sit in a room and listen to folks without feeling like it's going to be an ass whooping or it's going to be a beat up.
Totally.
I actually think that sometimes the perception on SPD's part is that is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think walking into the room buys you a lot of credit just in and of itself.
Totally
you
agree.
sitting down. And do you need to every time have an equal exchange, or could there be some understanding of the fact that there is that power differential that you're talking about, and maybe you have held the mic for a little while, and maybe it's okay to sit down and listen to what somebody says, and it is okay for another occasion to be a time where maybe you come back and you share a little bit of your perspective, but taking a turn listening for a meeting or for several meetings or to various communities, or you know, when the house is on fire, that is not the time to come and pour gasoline. Like, it might be okay to come in with a different energy. It might be okay to just read the room. And I think that there's also this idea from SPD that community members do not understand these complex policing practices and protocols that you have. You know, like it is, they just don't get it. It's beyond them. And it's really not. I mean, you know, y'all, it's not that complicated. I think that what complicates it is the lack of transparency. People cannot see behind the curtain to know what is going on. But I think that if it was explained in calmer situations, I think that there would be some understanding of that. But is it so unbelievable that somebody may point out something to you that would cause you to examine your practices and say maybe the way that we are doing things is not the best approach to doing things? I mean, isn't that just how we improve in general? And I can
100%.
say even in the time that I've been in the role that I've been in.
Which is how long, by the way?
August 2024.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can say that I've seen changes that have been implemented into the way that SPD approaches things. I'd like to take a ton of credit for my department for that. I mean, the crowd management ordinance, for instance, that was recently passed was heavily influenced by the CPC, which was heavily influenced by communities, and SPD is better for it. And so I think that it's not unreasonable that listening could yield some solutions. And,
Don't disagree.
And if it is an ass whooping, maybe the next time it won't be. Or maybe it'll be a lighter ass whooping.
I think I made a joke, like my first year on the job.
Steadily decreasing ass whoopings.
Lessening, you know?
Yeah, you
At one point, it's just a
remember.
love tap. You know?
You remember, you were in the meeting. It was the meeting where I met Joy Hollingsworth for the first time. It was at Garfield. It was a community meeting. I think Vicky Beach had invited me out. And I was always from the jump, because of that 911 perspective, I felt like, okay, we need policing. We need responsible policing. We need this other thing, right? We really desperately need, half these calls they're public health calls. That was clear to me. And so whenever I went out to present, and this was even in the kind of the genesis phase, I was still speaking in support of law enforcement. And I never knew who I was talking to, but I would usually talk for 5 minutes. And that first year, people would then yell at me for an hour. And it never offended, and not at me. I mean, they were directing their anger. But there was so much grief and frustration at that time. And I remember you saw it. I didn't know that I was talking to some of the leaders of Chop Chaz, some of the organizers. I had no idea, but it did not offend me. And I used to make the joke, like, I'm just here's a basket, put your anger and your frustration and your grief in it, because then we can go to work. And so
You're actually brilliant at that, though. I mean, that's a skill set, Amy, that you have that it exceeds anything I've ever seen anywhere. It is hard. It is hard to go in and take take that and you're correct. It's not they're not mad at you, but they're expressing anger towards you.
Right.
And that is really tough. And that's why not every cop makes a good community policing officer, because it's really, really tough. But I'll say this standard that you're representing, you are the best of the best, and I've never seen anybody.
This is the first time
better.
I've been complimented by him on this podcast.
Yeah.
No,
Soak it in.
Yeah,
Just receive that from it. Let that
no, but
marinate.
this is what I will say. I feel like this. Thank you for the praise. I feel like that is leadership 101.
Yeah.
Is to absolutely own what has gone wrong. I have been in more meetings with more people calling mission accomplished, and that never happened, and you're all good here. And I don't think it's useful. I don't think it's useful. I think that, I have a role to play, and part of it is understanding the pain, the grief, the frustration, and how should this look? And so I think that's why it's still, we're 5 years, actually we're in 2026, right? We're almost 6 years out. It is still feverish out there. And I think in part there's not adequate acknowledgement of, what people have asked for.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said yesterday, I did a different podcast. I said, we are not moving fast enough. We're not, I had a pilot team of 6 for 18 months. It's just nonsense. I could scale this, or other jurisdictions that went to 124/7 in a year, and you actually see a lot less harm, and you see better utility and less exhausted cops.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I will say that, 2020, I lived through 2020 as a cop on the front lines, out in the field, leading large groups of officers in 2020, 2021. And it was a surreal experience. Every day at work, and then on the radio driving home, and then on the news at home, and then on the radio back to work, and then on the street. The extraordinary hate for law enforcement was palpable. Our language changed. There was things that you could not say. You couldn't even question certain issues. And the police were really hated during that period of time. I mean, we've never been super popular, but that was a really, really challenging time. And so I think that I think that you're right, that it is a skill set. It's also part of leadership to step through that and to understand that people have differing perspectives, and to listen to that. I can assure you that while I'm not at your skill set by any means in that regard, I've been in dozens and dozens of meetings that we were being criticized. And in some of those cases, we did some stuff wrong. We were wrong, and we should have done better. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. Again, sort of the formality that after coming through the consent decree and whatnot, that the level of formality that we have now in terms of investigations, much of it is much improved and much of it is much better. But earlier you were saying, I can't comment specifically about OPA complaints. Well, one of my complaints from being within the police department and there for so long, and seeing policing and supervision and direction provided to officers pre-consent decree and then post-consent decree. While on paper we've made huge improvements, functionally we've lost some substance in terms of supervision. And I'll explain that in this way. When I came on in the late 1800s,
I would know nothing about that.
I know. You ladies were not around.
I know nothing about that. I'm quite young, for the record.
When I came on, sergeants were like revered. Like sergeants, first line supervisors were like You did whatever your sergeant, expected of you. Lieutenants were sort of there. Captains you hardly ever saw. And so supervision was done instantaneously, in the moment, on the spot. Corrections were made, and people often towed the line. We had an IIS at the time.
I don't know what that is.
Internal Investigation Section. That then became OPA. But IIS was investigators that would look into more serious incidents. And IIS was obviously, again, or still, or similarly to OPA, very scary to officers. No one wants to be investigated or found to be, out of compliance with expectations, policies, or rules. But what's happened since the consent decree is OPA has assumed much of the supervisory role in the police department, to the point where if just de minimis issues, it was so bad at a point in time. I think we're recovering a little bit, and there's an effort to reclaim some of this ground. But if someone was late, or somebody, violated a minor policy, the sergeant would just write that up and send it to OPA for OPA to make a decision. And then 6 months later, some third party is going to decide whether or not this person, it's just ludicrous. We need to have the opportunity for sergeants to provide on scene, in the field, supervision and correction with the authority to enforce that. And because of some of our efforts have gone so far that it's degraded the ability of supervisors to supervise. And I don't know if that's something that comes up very often, or if you've heard that perspective, but I really hope that we get back to a point where sergeants handle and chains of command, sergeants, lieutenants, and captains handle de minimis violations, and OPA is reserved for only serious violations.
Well, we'll see how this new union contract works out, right? Because that's a specific issue that it speaks to.
Are you speechless?
A little bit. No. Eci is fantastic. This is great. This thing is going long because we're having a really good conversation. We want to keep the conversation going. So hope you've enjoyed the first part of this episode, and we welcome you back for part 2.
The Bombardin Podcast is a Barden Squared production. Executive producers are Eric Barden and Amy Barden, and video and audio production of the Bombardin Podcast is by Thread Theory Creative.